So today and on Monday, we are going to be talking about stem and leaf plots. Okay, so a stem and leaf plot is a way of organizing numerical data by place value. Okay, so again, we have that numerical data. Remember, that just means that I have numbers. Okay, and I want to put them in an organized way, and I do that specifically by its place value. Okay. Now, stem and leaf plots are used mainly so that we can see very quickly how much certain data happens. Okay. So I always, when I'm looking at a stem and leaf plot, I always need to look at the key to know what each of the leaves are representing. Okay, what I mean by that, if I look down here, I get a different color, I think. If I look down here, right here, here's my key. Okay, and I can see it says 7, a straight up and down line, 2. That's not 712, that's 7 with a line and 2 is representing 72%. Okay, so this stem and leaf plot is talking about grades on report card. Okay, so we call these numbers right here the stem, and we call these the leaves, the leaf. Okay, I want you to think about a tree. Okay, so I have a tree over here. Okay, and I have all of these limbs. Okay, here's my crazy looking tree. Okay, so each of these right here are my stems. Okay, so this is the 5, the 6, the 7, the 8, and the 9. Okay, now because of the key is telling me this is percentages. So that means every leaf that's on this 5 limb is in the 50s for the grade. These leaves are the 60s. These are the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s. Okay? That's what that stem means. That means everything on this limb has to be within that grade percentage. Okay? So now let's go ahead and make some leaves. So I'm looking at the 50s. Okay? The stem is telling me these need to go on this limb. Okay? These leaves, okay, if the stems are the tens place this time, the leaves are the ones place. Okay, so this leaf right here, there's a 0. Okay, if I do a place value chart, this is the ones, right? And this is the tens. So this is telling me there's a 0 in the ones place, and there's a 5 in the tens place, which means that this leaf right here that I'm drawing right here has to be 50. Okay, then I see that I have another leaf that's 50 and a third leaf that's 50. Okay, then I have one that's 51, and finally one that's 54. Okay, and I'm only drawing this tree right now just to represent why it's called a stem and leaf plot. Okay, we're not going to draw the tree every time, but I want you to understand where this is coming from. Okay, so now we're going to go to the 60s tree limb. Okay, remember the 6 is in the tens place, and these numbers are in the ones place. So that means I have a 63, 2 64s, a 65, a 66, well, 2 66, and a 67. Okay, and then I can continue on. The next one is the 70s. So I see I have 2 70s. I have two 71s, and I have a 72. Down here on the 80s, I only have two leaves this time on the 80s, and they're both 88. And then on the 90s, I have three leaves. I have a 90, a 91, and a 92. Now, the most often asked questions when it comes to a stem and leaf plot are these two questions. Number one, what number or what leaf shows up the most? Okay, and they might ask you in weird terms. They might say, what data value shows up the most? Okay, what that means is when I'm looking over here at these leaves, which one do I see the most? Not which one is the highest, but which one has the most leaves. Okay, so I do see that a couple of them have two. So like there's two 88s here, there's two 70s, there's two 66s. Okay, but up here in the 50s, there's actually three 50s. So if they asked me which data value or which leaf shows up the most, for this, I would say it would be 50 because it has more leaves than any other number. And then they almost always will ask you a question, what is the difference between the highest grade and the lowest grade? Okay, so your highest grade, let me change this to a different color, see if this will work. Your highest grade is always the very last one. So you go to the highest stem, okay, and you go to the highest leaf on that stem. Okay, so in this case, that would be 92 is the highest grade. Okay, then you do the same thing for the lowest. You go to the absolute lowest, which for this is 5. And again, you go to the lowest, which would be 50. And then you find the difference, which there would be 42. Now, one thing that they do try to do sometimes to kind of trick you is they'll say, what's the difference between the second highest percentage and the second lowest? Okay, so in this case, the second lowest would be 91. Okay, and the second, or excuse me, that was the second highest. And the second lowest would also be 50. And so that would be 41. So always make sure that you are reading the question carefully so that you know for sure what they're asking you to do. So here is a question from the textbook. It says, for 10 weeks, Joseph washes cars after school. He washes a different number of cars each week. Okay, so it gives me that data, 23, 2, 30, 12, 41, 13, 17, 42, 4, and 24. Okay, he created this stem and leaf plot to organize the data. Oh, look at that question. What is the difference between the greatest and least values? Didn't I just say that that's a most common question? Because it really is. So let's go ahead and look. So it's number of cars washed. Okay, and remember the very first thing, we look at the key. So here it is. Now remember this straight line that's going right here? That's not a 1. That's just a vertical line showing you that there's a difference between the first digit and the second digit. So they're saying the first digit here and the second digit here equals 12. So this is like the one I just showed you. That means that my stems are the tens place and my leaves are the ones place. Okay, so that means that each of these leaves are weeks because it's telling me up here he washes a different number of cars each week. So each leaf is a week. So I need to find the greatest and the least values. So again, if I'm finding the greatest, I go all the way to the biggest number, which is 4. So 4 in the tens place. And I go all the way to the biggest leaf, which is 2. So in this case, that's 42. Okay, and then to find the least, I go all the way to the lowest, which in this case is 0. That means there's a 0 in the tens place. And I go to the very first leaf, which is 2. So mental math tells me that the difference there is 40 cards. Okay, so now we're going to use this stem and leaf plot to answer questions 1 and 2. So before we look at the questions, let's break it down. Okay, so we're talking about points scored. Now, we don't know for sure, what this is. It could be a basketball game, soccer game, we don't know. But somebody's scoring points, okay? And so we see our stems and our leaves. I see that there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 total leaves. Sometimes that's important, sometimes it doesn't matter, but I always like to count them just in case. So as always, I look at my key. Here's that line again, okay? And hey, we're getting lucky because this is just like the one we just did. So 1, 2 is 12. So again, the stem is 10 and the leaves are the ones place, okay? So they're asking me here, what is the least number of points and what is the greatest? So when I'm looking for the least, remember I'm on the lowest stem, which is here in the ones, right? And then I go to the very lowest leaf. So my lowest, if there's a 1 in the tens place and a 2 in the ones place, is 12. And then the greatest, I do the same thing. I go to the very biggest stem, which is 4 in the tens place, and I go to the very biggest leaf, which is 5 in the ones place. Okay? That's all that this question asked for. It didn't ask me to find the difference. It just asked me to find the least and the greatest. So on this question, how many data values, look at that, data values, when you see that word, think leaf, okay? Because that's really just what it means. So how many data values are displayed in the stem and leaf plot? Well, look at that. I did need that this time. Remember, before I even did anything, I counted how many leaves there were. That's what this question is asking me. Okay, so there are 14 leaves, and leaves is the same thing as data values. Okay, data is information, value is the number. And explain. What is the meaning of this key at the bottom of a stem and leaf plot? So what is the meaning of this? All right, so why should the data from a table be written in numerical order before making a stem and leaf plot? Interesting. Why should they be written in numerical order? Think about that question and look over here. What does numerical order help us to do when we're making that stem and leaf plot?